All right. Hello, my Psi enthusiasts and explorers out there, to an episode of what we're going to call Psi Games Talks, right? And so here we're going to be bringing you a lot of the different speakers that are going to be at the Psi Games and just giving you a little bit about their background, their history, their perspective on things, and why they're engaged in this and why we engage them for this particular event, so that we can start to bring forward a new and usher in a new era of understanding about consciousness and our capabilities when it comes down to all things Psi. And so today who we're talking with is Paul Smith, or Dr. Paul Smith. I like to call him that. He is my first remote viewing instructor, so I'm a little biased, and I tend to be very loyal and protective over my instructors. And I really have to say that out of many of the classes and courses that I've done on remote viewing, his stands far and above a lot of the rest. And so I just really appreciate him being a part of the Psi Games and his support. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Paul Smith. We also have Tyler on the line. I don't want to forget Tyler. Tyler also is a remote viewer, and he's working with the Psi Games on the executive team, helping out with media and graphics and things of that nature. He'll be here helping us interview Paul Smith as well. So now let me digress and go back to thanking Paul Smith to be on the line. And Paul, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your remote viewing background and how you ended up here with us on Psi Games Talks?
Well, I know it's hard to believe, but I did start off as a child. But I won't go back that far. So
start off, I think you're like still there, aren't you? Like
I like to think I am, yes. But so far I haven't been convinced anybody that knows me very well. I grew up in the West, in Nevada, born in Oregon, grew up in Southern Nevada, spent a lot of time working on farms in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. Ultimately went to BYU, went on a Mormon church mission to Switzerland, which was awesome. And then ended up joining the Army, enlisted for Arabic language training, made it to sergeant, and then transitioned over to officer and spent the rest of my time as an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. During 7 years of that time, while I was a captain, I was actually recruited into this, what's now known as the Stargate program, which was the military's remote viewing effort that was going on for about 18 years during the Cold War. I spent 7 years as a line remote viewer. I did a lot of operational remote viewing, also a trainer. I was also the unit historian, on orders to be unit historian and security officer. We all had more than one hat. And at the end of that time, I got sent off emergency deployment to the 101st Airborne for Desert Storm, and went all the way through Desert Storm and came back and then worked in more conventional intelligence jobs until I retired. When I retired, I decided I needed something to do that was constructive. So I started teaching others the remote viewing practices and procedures and skills that I had both been taught and developed while I was in the military. And I've been doing that ever since, along with doing interviews like this, participating in Psi Games, and so on. So there's probably more I could say, but I think people are falling asleep already, so I better stop.
I would gather, I think one of the cool things about the military in when I was in, and then I'm sure your time, is you get paid to kind of train. And so I would gather that was pretty cool. But then when you got out and you became a civilian, what was it like to now have to train civilians? Because I've been through your class, and I mean, it's like, full on, like it feels like 9-10 hour days. Then we got to go back and we have like 2 or 3 hours worth of homework. And then we have to wake up early and you have to look at our homework. And then we do another 10-hour day, and that's for a whole week. And so if you are maybe not used to that type of rigorous training or, or teaching, it can be very overwhelming. So what was that like in your first years once you got out of the military and you started actually training civilians?
Well, I respect my students, but I don't coddle them. I think a lot of people come into the remote viewing world pay for training and then want it to be easy. And I don't want it to be harder than it has to be because I don't want to discourage people. But at the same time, anything worth learning is usually a bit hard to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so I employ the same strategies, the same approach that the folks who developed remote viewing, particularly controlled remote viewing, which I teach, I use the same methods and approaches that they do, and I know to be absolutely effective. I know a lot of other folks out there that are kind of my competition, and they're a whole lot easier on their students. They let them get away with a bunch of stuff that they shouldn't, and consequently, their students don't master the skill nearly to the degree that my students do. Mm. And if you're going to pay me big bucks to teach you how to do it, doggone it, I'm going to teach you how to do it. And you may not like it. Although the irony is, I think most of my students do like it. They like to be challenged. They like to be pushed to excel. And most of them do. So I don't know if that answered your question, but there's an answer for you.
Yeah, I think it does. Do you find that, so you did mention that several of your students do, especially your civilians, like that challenge. But do you feel like there was a difference between the rigors of the military and the civilian world when it comes down to training?
So if you think about the actual rigors, no, there's not really. In my program, there's lectures, there's essay writing, there's exercises, and then there's the actual doing of remote viewing. And we do a lot of remote viewing sessions in my week-long courses, okay? So from the standpoint of rigor, it's not more rigorous. It's just that we do it over a much shorter period of time than we did in the military. Mm-hmm. So people who don't understand CRV aren't going to quite get this, but they'll get the general idea. So stages 1 through 3, there are 6 stages in controlled remote viewing. You start off with a basic stage 1, and then you do stage 2, then you do stage 3, and then it goes on up. So when I was trained, the Ingo Swan, we'll mention Ingo later on. In fact, there's a picture behind me of him right there. Ingo Swan, who's my trainer and the one who originally developed remote viewing. He started the whole remote viewing idea. Ingo Swan had us doing essays and all that stuff, had us doing all this, had us do a lot of remote viewing sessions, but it was spread out over a 12-month period. Okay, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I'll mention a couple of them here in a second. But my course that covers almost entirely that same terrain is 5.5 days long, plus homework during those days. So you can imagine that that's a compressed work schedule. And it's a whole lot more challenging than what we were doing. We worked with Ingo 2 weeks on, 5 days each week. So these are government work weeks, right?
Yeah.
Then we had 2 weeks off. And the actual time we worked on lectures and all of these things was probably 5 hours a day, I want to say, maybe less when you add it all up, because we had to wait while our fellow students did their remote viewing sessions before it was our turn, and so on. And so, and then we had a couple of big gaps because the Army got kind of, let's just say, confused about the remote viewing program. And there was a couple of periods of time when we didn't train for a month, maybe something like that. We still did training practice to keep our skills in shape back at our home base, but we didn't go train with Ingo. So there's reasons why that it took 12 months. It normally wouldn't have taken that long, but because of the bureaucracy, it did. But even if we had not had all of that, my course that I teach now is a lot more condensed than it was. So we do the same stuff. It's just squished in there, and you got to work harder for a shorter period of time.
Oh, how competitive were the remote viewers in the program? Were you guys able to have competitions against each other, or was it too compartmentalized?
No, and that's one of the things I'm looking forward to the Psi Games to see how that works. We were not, and there's an actually very sound intelligence reason for that, because oftentimes we'd be all working on the same target, but different aspects of it, and they didn't want us to know what the other viewers were working on. So in order to be competitive, that kind of information would have to be shared among the viewers. And so they didn't want that to happen. So we didn't have that kind of a competition. I want to see, and I kind of think there's going to be value in that in terms of enhancing people's skills. Because we know that competition, the right kind of competition, obviously can be done the wrong way, but the right kind of competition in a learning environment can actually dramatically enhance the learning process. So I think that this has some real promise.
I think that's beautiful that you said that, because I have run into that. I mean, we're dealing, especially in the civilian world, we're dealing with the consciousness space. And a lot of people like to really come at this space, and for good reason, with, love and kindness and community, which is what we want. So then they hear the word competition. And so because our culture,
it's a dirty word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's because the way our culture is kind of set up with certain, games and sports and stuff, we tend to think, competition means like one person has to be a loser and another person has to be a winner, and we have to put that person down, and then my team has to be the best. And one of the things that I watched on Netflix is I watched a series that kind of helped solidify this idea, where they had a Rubik's Cube competition. They had a young man who had autism, and his family thought that he would just lock himself in the room and he didn't want to do anything. And he ended up finding this Rubik's Cube video on YouTube, fell in love with it, then found out about this Rubik's Cube competition, decided he wanted to go, asked his parents. They were blown away because they were like, he's never wanted to do anything. Let's bring him there. And through that competition, he now has a multitude of friends. He's one of the champions. They all get on Zooms and they push each other and inspire each other to the next level. He found love, community, collaboration, all of the things that are really positive for his life. And what he didn't find is people laughing at him and putting him down and telling him he was stupid or they're better than he is or any of that stuff. These guys are all working together. So replicating that type of competitive environment is really keen. And I think I read in Ingo Swann's book, Secrets of Power, where he was saying that part of the way man has come so far is our ability to actually push ourselves and compete for reaching new levels, whether it was that competing over food with animals or something of that nature. When we have that we have to make it to this next level, then it really pushes us to strive for that level.
And there's ways of doing that in a good-natured way, which is probably most productive. But if you think about it, what competition allows is you to learn from your mistakes and to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yes.
And it enhances the learning process. Now, obviously, Psi Games is a competition in the sense of everybody comes together who already thinks they know what they're doing or hopes they know what they're doing, right? They come together and they compete, and then there will be a winner. I mean, this is kind of a zero-sum game in a certain sense. Because you've got a first, second, third, I don't know how many places. But that's the incentive. You get incentive in there. When everybody comes together and cooperates, you don't have incentive to innovate. I'm going to say that's not totally true. You don't have as much incentive to innovate, or you have a different kind of incentive to innovate, to try new things, to risk things. And in fact, in any setting, I won't say any setting, there's probably exceptions, but in most settings, you have to risk to gain. Right? You have to take risks. If you're not willing to take risks, then you're not going to progress at all, or maybe not very rapidly.
Yeah. That's really well put, and that's what I'm hoping we get out of the Psi Games. In addition to recognizing and finding who are the people out there who can do things we didn't even think were possible. And I bring that back to the Ingo Swanns and the Pat Prices. Like from what I understand, Ingo wasn't always on the radar of Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, but then he became a person of interest and then became a part of the program. And then later, Pat Price kind of inserted himself into the program.
Yeah. So let me clarify one thing. Ingo actually was the seed around which they formed the program.
Okay.
The program didn't even exist. until Ingo, it was very synchronistic in a way, very synergistic is probably a better term here, very synergistic. Program didn't exist until Hal and Ingo got together.
Mm-hmm.
And then Russell Targ joined them very early on. That's when the CIA decided to throw money at them. And SRI, Stanford Research Institute at the time, agreed to be the home for that. And that got that ball rolling, right? Very, very synergistic, synchronistic, serendipitous. I don't know what word you want to use, but very, very true. I have two kind of metaphor examples to throw at you having to do with sports. One is running, okay? Until somebody broke was it the 4 minute? I'm not much of a sports guy, so I don't remember.
4 minute mile is the banister.
4 minute mile. Everybody thought you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And then once that person did it, then everybody did. Another case was America's Cup. If you're familiar with America's Cup, that's that big sailing competition between Australia and the United States and other nations are involved now. United States won that like 150 times over 150 years, right? And then people started saying, well, what are we doing wrong? It's a competitive environment, and it forced innovation, it forced people to think and change their paradigms, literally change their competitive paradigms. And then they keep coming up with new tech that isn't against the rules, like the flying keel. I think that's what they call it. That was introduced in a America's Cup sailing race, and the folks who had that boat just beat the socks off of everybody. And all the other guys are saying, you can't do that, you can't do that. And they look at the rule book and doesn't say you can't do that, right? And then now everybody's got that, It raised not just the success level of the people who are doing it. It led to the success level of everybody in the field being improved.
Yeah.
And so competition isn't just for one person to win. It's so everybody ultimately wins.
I love that. Everybody ultimately. We need a soundbite, Tyler. That's it.
Yeah, I got you. Well, piggybacking off of the sports, because I just found a question. A lot of how I equate remote viewing is to baseball and statistics. So we're talking about like ranking, losers, winners, but I would see it more as like who is doing the best in terms of their statistics. But Paul, my question is, how would you recommend, or how do you keep track of your statistics with remote viewing to see how well you're doing?
So I didn't. I'll explain why in a minute. I want to go back to statistics. So yes, in science, statistics play a huge role. Even in remote viewing research, play a huge role. But what is a statistic? Okay, it is statistics are not some magical thing that tells you, measures how everything does. What they are is really individual instances, individual events, and the outcomes of those individual events that are all brought together, aggregated is technically the term, brought together, and then mathematical magic is done on them to give you an idea of trends and directions and that kind of thing. So presidential votes are good examples. So people say, well, the one president won by 2% or 1.5% over the other candidate. Sorry, one candidate became president because 1.5% of the vote. What is that 1.5% of the vote? It's a certain number of people voting in a certain direction instead of the way they were. So science likes to put down this idea of anecdotal evidence, and there's good reason for that. Anecdotal evidence is where you use examples to prove a point. So, for example, in ESP research, let's say, somebody says, well, look, so-and-so predicted this event and it really happened. So that's proof that ESP is real. No, it's not. That's only a one-off. It could accidentally have happened, right? That's an anecdote. But what statistics are is a whole bunch of anecdotes all put together to the point where you can be certain to a certain degree of probability that this wasn't an accident. Okay, that's very important. Same, and those are the statistics in baseball. How many times you get up to bat and how many times you hit the ball and what happens. And, I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But statistics are a measurement, but they're made up of a whole bunch of individual instances. And that's important to keep in mind when you start talking statistics. Now, I didn't like keep track of statistics because notoriously remote viewing is really hard to track statistically. The reason is the results of remote viewing, we don't have magic computer programs. Maybe AI ultimately will give us one, but it hasn't yet. We don't have magical computer programs that can take a remote viewing session and tell you what probability that session is or what percentage of correct that session is. And there's a lot of reasons for it. I know it puts people to sleep again if I explain it. But we don't have any way of actually measuring remote viewing. So what they've done to develop remote viewing statistics is that they'll have a remote viewer target, and then they'll show a judge, let's say 5 possible targets. The real one's in there somewhere, but the judge doesn't know which one's the real one. The judge goes through them all and says, well, it's not that one, and it's not that one. And he's comparing what the viewers produce to the targets. He says, well, this right here really resembles what the viewer produced, so I think that's the target, okay? And if it is the target, that's a hit, okay? But again, that's an anecdote. That's just a single instance. And so they have to do that over and over and over again. And so if I were going to get a percentage of hits, every target I had ever worked would have to be judged and ranked ordered in that process. So, so
then it would be compared to chance, right? So then
compared to chance, how often would the judge guess the correct target? Well, 1 out of 5, you 1 out of 5 times, right? If you have 5 distractor targets, 1 out of 5 times, by chance you would. If the judge in the end, and that's 20%. If the judge in the end has successfully, in a blind, not knowing what the target is, in blind fashion, has successfully matched the correct target 80% of the time, that is mind-blowing success. And there's almost zero chance that that was done accidentally. It would be like flipping a penny and having it come up heads, flipping it 100 times, have it come up heads 80 times. And that is so unlikely that people would think that there was something wrong with that penny. So, and so because of that, I don't have statistics on how well I did. So there's some, that opens up an even bigger discussion that we probably shouldn't get into today. But yeah, there are attempts to figure out how to solve this problem that haven't quite yet got there yet. So.
Well, that's fantastic. I do want to go back because I hadn't finished one of my points when I had talked when we started.
Too late. Time's up.
And that is like the Psi Games creating an element where we can start to really figure out in an open forum what people can do out there. And then I was bringing up Ingo and Pat as an example, but especially Pat, who came into the program way later. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but it was like he kind of inserted himself in the he wasn't really, he came to Hal and was like, from what I understand of the story, you can correct me.
He showed up about a year later, maybe not quite a year later after it started. And he walked in off the street and volunteered.
Yeah.
So even though that they were doing it for the CIA was classified, the fact that they were doing that research wasn't, because it was an open science research facility, SRI was. Yeah. So yes, you're right. Okay, go ahead.
So then, it turns out, and we all hear the stories, us young folks, that he was one of the best, and he could do things that at the time they didn't even really recognize was possible. And he could do it. Actually, he could do it repetitively. Say that again. I'm sorry.
That's still true to some degree.
Yeah. And so here you have a person, when we talk about research, there are people who put out requests for people to study, or they might hear somebody and they want to study that person. But then that person has to be willing, and then they have to be able to get over the jitters or the oddness of being in a laboratory setting with all of these restrictions. And then you have some random guy out there who just is like, this is what I can do, and I'm willing to show it. How many Pat Prices are in the world right now walking around?
Well, you're hoping they show up for Psi Games.
I'm hoping eventually we start finding those people. that those people feel comfortable enough to just come in, because we're not ridiculing them. We're not saying that they're bad people. And, they have an open forum to come and share and collaborate and grow, and like almost a walk on a football field, so.
Yeah. And if anything, this is going to be one of the more open environments for actual psi performance. I think that's the feeling I'm getting from your concept here.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that we allow any weird claim that anybody can come up with.
Yeah. No.
I'm just going to be there. I'm not part of the organizing.
Yeah. I mean, we still have an assessment process where people have to be assessed, and we have applications to help us with that, and that will allow that a person can't cheat. They have to go through that. They have to go through that process, and then it'll give us their stats electronically to tell us how far above chance they were able to perform, and then we can kind of say, hey, yeah. But I'm hoping that this opens up the stage for us to start looking and finding those Pat Prices and Ingo Swans that are walking out there that really aren't doing this for money, and they're not doing this for just to be doing it, but it's something that they're interested in showing and pushing themselves and seeing where that goes. And
so essentially, a term we use in the military, but in a lot of other fields as well, this is a screening mechanism.
Yeah, well, screening for the people, not for the government.
Yes. No, the government doesn't screen for the government. The government screens for people that might be useful to the government, or that are people they don't want to have anything to do with.
Yeah.
Case. In this case, we're looking for top-notch people who are going to be able to be competitive.
Yeah, because that will inspire the next generation to say, "Oh, I didn't know that was possible." Like the 4-minute mile. I didn't know that was possible. I thought that was a myth and nobody could do that. So if he can do it, maybe I could do it, Yep. And then that creates this environment where people will now be motivated to push themselves to see what they're capable of. Yep. Speaking of that, do you think, and I believe I already know the answer, but if you could say it out loud,
don't they say in the legal profession, never ask a question you don't already know the answer to?
Exactly. How is remote viewing something that or these type of abilities, these psi abilities, in your experience after many years of doing this, is this something that everyone could do, that everyone's capable of?
Well, let me give you an answer that there's data behind first. Okay,
I love that.
The researchers at SRI International, Stanford Research Institute, Russell Targ, Hal Puthoff, I'll keep mentioning their names so people remember them. Their conclusions in a number of reports they supplied to the CIA, based on data that they developed, was that it is, as they called it, a widely distributed human ability that almost everyone seems able to at least accomplish. Whether they master it or not is a different thing, but everyone they tested, in fact, showed at least some ability to do it. And that's been my experience with my students. I've only run into one student who I felt like totally failed. I've had some that performed marginally. I've had some who just blew the doors off of it too, but I only had one who failed, and I think that's because, and I'm going to give you a lot of background here because I don't want the guy to feel bad if he ever listens in. He was functionally illiterate. It turned out he took my class, and I found that oftentimes I'll have 4 or 5 people. I only allow 2 students per instructor, and if I have more than 2 students, if I have 4, I get 2 instructors. If I get 6, I get a third instructor. So we have always a 2-to-1 or less student-teacher ratio, and I don't do any more than that. But I found sometimes I'll have like 4 or 5 people wanting to take the class, and then one by one they drop out, leaves me with one student. And so I'll go ahead and do the class. And I often find that there's a reason. It's like the universe says, you are going to need to spend all your time with this one person. And in fact, in this case, that was the case. I worked really hard with him. And he was really trying hard. But I think he couldn't get the concept. Somehow it just wasn't working for him. And I have a lot of tricks I use to try and help people get around blocks they have. Nothing worked with him. It was discouraging for both of us, sadly.
Yeah.
But I've only had one person like that. I have 1 or 2 who refused to learn it. I won't go into that. They already had their preconceived, maybe I will. They already had their preconceived ideas about how it worked. And those preconceived ideas didn't actually work all that well, but they refused to give those up. They had been too embedded in their consciousness, I guess, or whatever. They refused to give them up, or they refused at least to set them off to the side and try it the way that I was trying to teach them. And so consequently, they didn't succeed either. But I think I know the reason for that, why that happened. So anyway, I'm off on a tangent here.
And I didn't appreciate you putting me on the spot like that as that student.
Well, and I'm not going to refund your money either.
I've been asking for this refund for like years.
I know it.
And then you just throw me under the bus. At least you didn't say
that's good exercise for you, though.
You just tell them it was Psi missing, Yeah.
Well, I mean, even that can be leveraged. I mean, Psi neutral is where you don't want to be.
Tyler, you have a question?
Well, I was actually, personal question. Have you heard, Paul, about this recent psionics stuff, or the word psionics? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know enough about it yet to give you an authoritative assessment. But I just have to say, so I've listened to the interviews Ross Coulthard did with Jacob
Barber.
Huh?
Barber. Jake Barber.
Yes, thank you, Barber. I knew it was a BA something or other. I couldn't remember. Yeah, see, there's part of the being old, right? It was Jacob Barber. And I found a lot of what Jacob said convincing or persuasive. Let me say persuasive. But some of the stuff about the psionics, and it really wasn't gotten into as much there as it's been made out to be since then. I really would like to know what's going on more before I form an opinion about that. It seems a little flaky to me. Now, what I'd love to do is go out in the field with those guys and see how they use it. And I certainly willing to be have an open mind about it, because we don't know everything in the universe. Remote viewing obviously can over time probably be improved if it's done properly. I mean, a lot of people just come up with a good idea and throw it in and think they're improving remote viewing, and it doesn't. But I think it could be improved, but we need to do it, responsibly. And so maybe there's something to psionics that actually is legitimate. I'm not ruling that out. But based on what I've heard so far, I won't say skeptical, but I am dubious. So.
One of the things that is kind of thrown around too in the UFO community at this point is just about the remote viewing program. There's a lot of questions on, after it ended, could it have continued in some other fashion? What do you think? That the remote viewing program just ended or kept going?
As you can imagine, I've probably heard this. In fact, I think this is the 5,372nd time I've heard that question. But it's a reasonable question to have. I'm not giving you a hard time because you didn't hear the other 5,000, what did I say, 376 times. So I'll say this. I know for a fact that the CIA was not doing remote viewing after they canceled the program. I know for a fact. I know for essentially a fact that the military services are not. Now, there's a bit of logic in here. I mean, it's very hard to prove a negative, isn't it? They're not doing it. Well, prove it. Well, you'd have to actually open every door in the Defense Department to find out whether or not that they weren't doing it, right? But the odds are very good because they did not want to do it at the time they gave it to the CIA. And in fact, with the end of the Cold War and all of that, they had much better places to put their money from their perspective. There's a lot of skepticism about remote viewing in the military service and the intelligence community. There are people who absolutely knew it worked, but oftentimes those guys got outnumbered by skeptics who wouldn't even look at the evidence, literally. And you see that in today's world all the time. You have lots of people who are telling you, and they're skeptics, telling you, well, this stuff doesn't work. You say, well, what do you mean? How do you know it doesn't work? It can't work. It violates the principles of science. Well, I have a different argument about that, but I won't go there. But the fact is, well, look at this evidence. I'll say, I'm going to look at that. It doesn't work. That would be a waste of time to look at that evidence. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we know what's going on. Well, there was a bunch of folks like that in the military as well. And since then, the military intelligence world has gone a really different direction than where it was at the time. So I'm absolutely nearly absolutely certain the military isn't doing it. Ditto for the CIA. Now, is there a program still buried somewhere in government? It's possible NSA has a program. So they had one at the time that I was being trained. I'm not going to tell you how I know that, but I know that. And I never heard that it was discontinued ever. It doesn't mean it wasn't. I just haven't never heard it. Then some whistleblower back in around 2006, 2007 claimed that he had special. He was an NSA guy, so he did have access. Claimed that he had knowledge of a remote viewing program in the NSA. Okay, so is it still there? Was it really there when he said it was? I don't know, but I think that if it's possible, it's anywhere. It's in NSA. They're not going to admit it, and if they're doing it, I'm totally happy they're doing it. I think somebody ought to be doing it in support of national defense. So yeah, I know it's a long answer, but that's the best answer I've got for you. Sorry.
Well, I do know that there was someone who worked with you at some point in time that was on a recent show, and they mentioned 5 different programs that may have been.
Skip Atwater.
Well, you said it, I didn't. So
yeah. Hey, it was Sean. What was his name? Sean
Ryan.
Yeah, Sean Ryan. I was thinking Joe Rogan and Sean. So I had Sean Rogan going. I knew that wasn't right. Okay, so yeah, it was on Sean Ryan show. You don't get more public than that, right?
Yeah.
So it's fine. I don't mind using Skip's name. I actually need to. I keep saying I'm going to do this, and then I keep getting distracted by like interviews with Hakeem Isler
and Tyler. Don't forget Tyler.
Don't forget Tyler. I just didn't want to throw him under the bus. I've already done it twice to you. So yeah. So I mean, I need to talk to Skip, but talking back channel to some folks who conversed with him about that specific issue, I think I know what those programs are, and none of them are current.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to verify that with Skip. And in fact, I'm going to get him to do an interview with me if he'll consent, but I think he will, in which we get down into the weeds on that. Because if there is a program going on right now, okay, great. You heard me what I said. I'd love to think the government is at least not totally obtuse and stupid about this. But I also don't want to be there false information out there and people believing there's a program when there isn't. So I hope I can get to the bottom of it with Skip Atwater and see what he had in mind. And if he has some information, even if he doesn't give me the details, that's fine. If he has some information that involves a ongoing program right now, okay, great. But right now, I don't think that what he said is what people think they heard. So.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to the psionics thing that Tyler brought up, in the sense that, and maybe we can get to the nitty gritty of it. Do you, Paul, after all of the time that you've been in remote viewing, has there been accounts, either personal accounts or other accounts, of individuals bumping into or having encounters with things that might be considered otherworldly or NHI or interdimensional or any of these?
Yes, but not a lot of them. And I've had one experience. Now, to qualify this, of course, thinking you've had the experience doesn't mean you did. There's a lot of imagination that can get caught up in the remote viewing process that you have to be very careful of, because your own brain will tell you things that are wrong, that aren't true about the target. Okay. But let me go back to psionics for a minute. From the description I get of it, it's kind of a form of what we call remote influencing, where remote viewing is a passive process. It's where you get information, you get knowledge, you have experience that comes to you or that you seek out, but you aren't projecting anything out. That's what we call remote influencing. Okay. Psionics sounds like there's some projection going out, which is an active version. So it's not really remote viewing. Might be related, but it's not really remote viewing. But there seems to be an element of telepathy involved as well, which is, of course, mind-to-mind communication in some form. So psionics, if anything, isn't exactly remote viewing. It may not even be close to remote viewing. I need to know more about it. Okay. Now, to answer your actual question, there are instances where remote viewers reported interacting with, and since your question is specifically about non-human intelligence, or I like to say non-human intentional beings, okay, I'll specifically address that. The two really certain instances involve Dingo Swan. Actually, there are two different instances with him. One I find less credible. The less credible one is we were in New York for training with him, and he invited us over to his house one night, and he uncorked a $100 bottle of wine, which back in 1984, I don't know what it'd be worth today, but then it was an expensive bottle of wine. Now, I don't drink. I don't drink any kind of alcohol. But boy, that wine sure smelled good. I was really tempted that night. But he got, shall we say, a little inebriated. Once that bottle ran out, they opened a few more. and he decided he was going to try channeling space aliens. And he got into it, and he said a few things. And right now, I don't think there's anything concrete that really came out of it. And he finally said, "Oh, they're not going to talk to me," and then just quit. Right? I think that was probably the alcohol working for the most part. Right? But then he did. Well, he asked me to work a couple of different targets against the moon, with particular anomalies on the moon that are trying to get the bottom of. And I'll tell you about one of mine in a minute. But he also worked one on his own. And I have the recording of him with Bob Durant, who's a really good friend of his and also a good friend of mine. Bob Durant working as his monitor, trying to work him into going to a place on the moon that had been identified as some kind of weird aberration or anomaly on the surface. And he got into the place and talked about dome structures and various things like that. And they said, "They know I'm here." He said, "They know I'm here." And he said, "And they told me to get lost." Now, I'm paraphrasing. They didn't say it exactly like that. But essentially, he said, once it was done, he said, "They kicked me out." So that was one instance, and there's not a lot of detail to it because essentially he said he was denied entrance, basically, and didn't really have much more to say about it. My experience was, and I believe this target was on the dark side. Target was on the dark side of the moon, and came into it. And I won't go into the details. There's a whole bunch of them, and I go into detail when I give my talk. Remote viewing and UFOs, okay, but in this case, essentially, I perceived a what I'll call a spacecraft here, because it was obviously in space. I finally realized I was remote viewing the moon when I said, "I can't breathe." Okay, so I got an impression of a spacecraft, and it was kind of shaped like a manta ray, I guess, in a way. So kind of a bulge in the middle and kind of wings out to the side, except they weren't meant for flying. It's just the shape it had. And it's emerging from this cavern, which I'd already perceived and described before. And as it's approaching, I realized that it realized that I was there perceiving it. And when I say there, mentally there, whatever that means, that I was perceiving it. And it did not like that. But it felt helpless that it couldn't do anything about it. It just kind of experienced that displeasure and kept on going. And that was the first time and the last time I've ever been at a target when I felt like something perceived me at the target, some conscious entity, intentional entity, whatever, at a target, human or otherwise, recognized or realized that I was there based on interacting from some remote viewing in some remote viewing context. Okay. So did that really happen, or was that my imagination? I would say that I don't know, but it had the feeling of reality to it. Okay.
Yeah.
I know that you can make up stuff. I know you can do that. Not intentionally. You don't make it up on purpose. But I generally know the qualitative difference between data that seems more accurate and usually turns out to be, and experiences that don't quite have the feel of reality and usually turn out not to be.
Yeah.
So that's there you go. A long answer to a short question.
Okay. Tyler,
were you using a different like protocol, because you talked about remote viewing being passive and then psionics being more active, but you were at the location?
No, I was using my standard controlled remote viewing process, and this just happened. Okay, so I wasn't trying to get that; it just came my way, and it did suggest to me that there may be, if a sufficiently advanced consciousness is in the vicinity of where the remote viewing is trying to access, maybe there is some element of remote viewing that is detectable in some way. I'm not saying there is. I don't know, but it's suggestive in some way.
Do you think, based on your background and your knowledge, that practicing remote viewing and whatever's happening and taking place could be a bridge to get us to a place in consciousness where maybe we could, make some sort of contact or communication or something of that nature based on what you know about remote viewing?
Okay, so that brings up a whole nest of questions and answers here. Let me start with the first one. The first one is, can getting your remote viewing skills down allow you to then approach something like psionics? And I would say it could. I mean, I think all of this has to do with an underlying mechanism that humans are born with, that all kinds of psychic, as we'd call them, or ESP-based behaviors are associated with, including things that aren't just ESP, like maybe psychokinesis, what people mistakenly call, what do they call it now? Telekinesis. That's an old term. Psychokinesis is the correct term. I think some of these video games that have telekinetic actors or characters in them have promoted that telekinetic term. Sorry, I'm off on a sidebar. Can you tell? But they're really not telekinetic, and I won't go into the reason for that right now. But psychokinetic is the correct term, right? So I think that remote learning and mastering one basic consciousness-based skill like remote viewing is likely to make it easier to develop that skill further and acquire new capabilities and learn new skills. Just like learning one skill really well in regular life can oftentimes make it easier to learn another skill, particularly if that skill is related in some way. Learning one foreign language makes it easier to learn a second one, for example, and so on. Okay, so that's the first one. The second thing that brings up is, should we be trying to connect with these folks, whoever they are, whatever they are, these NHIs? And I know there's a lot of people out there who are very irresponsible at this. One of them, Stephen Greer, who I think is just way off on the wrong track here. The problem is there's an assumption in the remote or in the UAP UFO community, the popular part of it, there's an assumption that all aliens are benign, that they're all good folks, that they just want the best for us. And I think that may be a mistake. I don't think they're all evil-minded either. But, here on Earth, there are all kinds of people. There are people who are friendly. There are people who have your interests in mind. There are people who want to cheat you or rip you off. There are people who want to kill you. I mean, there's all kinds of good and bad actors in human society. And they make this assumption that let me say this right. So these aliens are significantly more advanced scientifically than we are. And the assumption is that if you're more significantly advanced technically and scientifically, then you must be more advanced morally. That's a logical fallacy. There's not any kind of entailment between the two. And I use the example of human history. So if you look at the conquistadors and coming to Mesoamerica, the conquistadors were far more scientifically advanced than the natives in Mesoamerica. They were not more morally advanced. And they weren't, I won't say that they were less, because there were some really nasty actors in ancient America as well. I mean, the Aztecs were vicious, literally vicious, but the Europeans weren't any better. And here they come with their science, essentially their technology, and of course they had the help of diseases and stuff too. But they essentially overwhelmed the natives. They weren't any more morally advanced. Next example I use is World War II. Who would you say the most scientifically advanced nation in the world at the time of World War II was? Who do you think?
I don't even want to guess.
Go ahead and guess. I'm curious to see what you'd say.
I'll leave it to Tyler.
China.
Huh? Yes, Tyler.
China. I would say China, maybe Japan.
Nazi Germany.
Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that's, of course, an opinion, but it's a well-informed opinion. The Nazis were very technologically advanced in a lot of respects. And if they'd have gotten the same breaks we did, they'd had the atom bomb first.
Mm.
They were trying hard for it, and they were close. We had to bomb their heavy water factory, or they might have gotten the bomb first, and then the whole history of the world would have been different.
Yeah.
But were they more morally advanced, even though they were far more technically advanced? No.
Yeah.
And at the risk of alienating people from the People's Republic of China, if you look today at Chinese, arguably are one of the most advanced technologies on the planet. They haven't reached our level yet, but they're trying really hard. Look at how they're treating the Uyghurs and other minority groups. They're treating them very nastily. And so that doesn't show moral advancement either. So I think it's a mistake to equate moral progress with technological progress. It does. They don't have anything to do with each other. Okay. And so we may be reaching out to contact aliens that are not good guys. Do we want to know that? There's a story about this bird who's a very optimistic bird, and he's flying around, and he's sitting on the ground, and some horse comes up and poops on him, right? A whole bunch of horsemen are on top of him. And the bird crawls out of the horse poop and sticks his head out, and he says, "Oh, I'm so happy to be alive. It's a great time." He starts chirping, telling the world how happy he is. Whew, in comes a hawk, snatches him up and eats him. The moral of the story is, be careful how you sound off and how you let the world know about you, right? And it could be a similar problem with us. We may luckily get a hold of some nice aliens. We may unluckily get a hold of somebody like Independence Day aliens. There's a great series of books, The Three Body Problems, the first book in it, written by a Chinese science fiction author, amazingly well done. And one of them is named Dark Forest. And in the Dark Forest, the book, they figure out that you do not want anybody else in the universe to know you're there. Because if they know you're there, even if you're not technologically advanced and you're no threat to them right now, the way the universe works is that you eventually will become technologically advanced. You may become more powerful than the other civilization that found out you were there 2 millennia before, right? And then you will go and wipe them out. And so because there's always a chance that any civilization, intelligent civilization, could ultimately become powerful enough to take you out, it's better off to take them out while they're still not advanced. And so this is like the bird and the horse poop story, right?
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I don't know if the universe is that way, but this is a very powerful argument. It's a very powerful argument. And so, so trying to contact alien species without knowing who the hell they are And what they're up to, assuming you can even do it, I'm not sure we can even do it, but assuming you can even do it, I think is a very bad idea. I think we need to vet the people we make friends with or attempt to make friends with before we go letting them know where we are and what and welcoming them here. The natives in Mesoamerica, when the conquistadors landed, at first welcomed them. They embraced them, thinking these were gods and thinking that they were going to bring peace and prosperity to them. And just the opposite happened.
Mm. Yeah. I think that's well put. I think it's well said. And just to, I think sometimes one of the things I really love about you, Paul, is that you're really balanced in your thinking. And sometimes I've heard, in circles, you may get a bad rap because you are very grounded in that way. And sometimes people want you to be very, consciousness, like enlightened, and so like
it's enlightened in the way they want me to be.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm trying
to do. To support their particular goals, their particular beliefs.
Yeah.
And it could be on any side. I mean, one set of people could be angry at me because I don't support theirs, while this other one is angry because I don't support theirs.
Yeah, and I think you're really balanced. Anytime I've heard you have a real deep conversation, you always, and even here we had that happen too, where you're like, I'm not sure. I have an opinion, but that opinion can change because I'm still trying to figure it out like everybody else. And me being someone who was in PSYOP in the past, I know sometimes if you don't agree with a person, then they immediately assume that you're like on the negative side. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're trying to say is just stay balanced. We're all figuring this out. We're all working together to get better in this and these abilities and what's happening and staying grounded and making sure that we're always taking in new information and we don't shut things out. And we're always looking at what's possible and thinking about that with a very discerning eye, I think is very grounded. It's very cool to hear that.
There's two sides to it. The first one is be balanced and objective, and the jury's out until you have some really strong evidence, right?
Yeah.
The other side of it is be careful about jumping to a conclusion about something and forming an opinion based on only a few facts or not the whole picture. And you see people doing that all the time where they will all of a sudden, I hate to use, I'll use this example. For example, they're absolutely sure there's bases in Antarctica, some kind of, some of the folks are the Hollow Earth people, something, there's a UFO bases in Antarctica. I'm not saying there's not. But when you start asking them, why do they believe it? It rarely is based on any actual evidence. It's usually based on because so-and-so said it was, on some late night radio show. And so they start believing it, and what I'm saying is don't believe anything until you have really some sound reasons for believing it. Certainly to say it's possible and look into it and start collecting information about it. But never believe anything just based on some person's testimony, not even me.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully well put. I don't want to dominate. I got two final questions for you, but I want to see if Tyler has anything.
I actually, you go ahead, Hakeem, and ask one, and I'll formulate my last one in a second.
Okay. So there's a lot of controversy over what remote viewing is. And, people think it's clairvoyance because they hear viewing and they think, oh, I'm seeing things and I can see the target. And I've heard you say in the past that it really should have been more like remote perception, not remote viewing. Mm-hmm. So would you like to speak on that and like clear the air on that? Because you got all these new systems out here and all these different methods. Yeah. And, things.
I don't have any hope that the air will be cleared, but at least I can hopefully uncomplicate a few things. We'll see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so remote viewing comes from Ingo Swann. He originally called it remote viewing because he was trying to use his visual perception to primarily. Now, of course, that's normal. Humans obviously privilege vision and sight as their primary sense. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But we do have 4 other senses that can be very powerful as well. And in a remote viewing environment, we were taught not just to see things, but to hear them, smell them, taste them, touch them. What did I leave out? There's one more. I forget which one I left out. No, maybe I hit them all. Okay, no wonder I couldn't find another one. I hit them all. Yeah, so we're taught, which are all perceptual tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so remote viewing, in a way, limits the process, even though we were not taught to limit it, despite the name. A lot of people come into it thinking they're going to have this grand view of the target. They'll know what it is instantly. It'll be very clear, and it'll all come out, and they'll be done, and they'll be, everybody will celebrate their victory and whatever. It doesn't work like that at all. Vision is just one of the 5 senses here, and in fact, it doesn't always come out all that clearly. You have to remember that your senses aren't actually involved. It's only as if they were involved, right? My theory is that whatever the remote viewing signal is that comes into our minds, that it bypasses the senses and goes straight to the perceptual centers and activates the perceptual centers. And then we have an experience as if we were getting visual input, or we have an experience as if we are getting audio input or something like that, even though our senses aren't directly involved. One of the problems with this, of course, is you have a more precise experience when you literally with your eyes see something or with your nose smell something than you do when your senses are bypassed and your perceptual centers activated. So remote viewing data, particularly early in a remote viewing session, is actually kind of vague. And you have to learn how to tease out the accurate material from, first of all, the mental noise, the inaccurate material, but also learn how to try and refine that data to a point where you can actually capture details that are useful to the client if you're doing an actual operational session. So yeah, it should be called that. Clairvoyance is the wrong word for it because technically clairvoyance is just seeing things, right? Clairvoyance, the French word meaning clear seeing, literally. Okay. Now I've had debates with John Kruth, who I really, really like. He's the executive director of the Rhine Research Center. The Rhine Research Center is the oldest parapsychology research entity in the country. It was founded by J.B. and Louisa Rhine back in 1933, 34, something like that. Anyway, so they have a real handle on ESP and that kind of thing. And he and I have this debate about clairvoyance. He says, well, clairvoyance can smell and taste and touch things too. And I'll say, well, that isn't how it started out being understood. It really literally means clear seeing. Remote viewing involves more. And one of the things that makes remote viewing, at least remote viewing done properly, that makes it different than all the other psychic modalities, is that we actually have a formalized process for managing the mental noise that's going on in our heads all the time. And that's one of the biggest problems with being psychic, is if you don't recognize that your brain is making stuff up that isn't the actual target, then you're going to get it wrong a good percentage of the time. If you know that there is this mental noise going on, that your brain is making stuff up, you can learn to manage that. That's a big chunk of what I do when I teach people remote viewing, is teach them how to deal with that mental noise. So I answered more than one question there. Sorry.
No, I mean, that was beautifully well put. Well put.
Yeah, I'll go off that too.
You're just trying to flatter me, Hakeem. I know. I'm not. It's not going to improve your grade on any.
Watch it now. Well, just going off of the Rhine, I'm a big supporter of the Rhine as well. John and Sally over there, and I know you're involved in parapsychology and knowledgeable about it. And what I found really refreshing was about the Psi Games, in that it was sort of this new initiative. What would you like to see, or maybe one of the challenges addressed in terms of Psi research or remote viewing going forward?
So not necessarily in terms of the Psi Games, although they could play a role. I would like to see more rigor in the remote viewing community. I think there's room for advancement and progress, but there is so much, and I'm going to be blunt, There is so much nonsense being tossed around in the remote viewing community that I think it really gets in the way of progress. Everybody and their dog has a different opinion about what's going to work better and what isn't. They have a different opinion about what you can remote view and what you can't. A lot of these problems actually were answered at SRI, but nobody does their homework. Nobody goes back and goes through the original sources. And so they keep reinventing the wheel, but they like to add these anomaly things to it. So why remote view a missing child when you can remote view an Arcturian from the Pleiades? I know that's a contradiction, but yeah. That seems to be kind of the attitude of the remote viewing world today. It isn't that they care about practical applications, ones that can be shown to be real. They all want to remote view anomalies like UFO events that may not have even happened, and certainly did have, and that's potentially useful. They want to remote view all these, xenobiology, like Bigfoot or Nessie or whatever. They want to remote view conspiracy theories. Where's Jimmy Hoffa buried? This kind of stuff, right? And I think it takes away from real progress in the field. First of all, you're not doing research when you're doing that. You're not solving real problems that you can actually get to the bottom of when you're doing that. Half the time, the targets that they remote view probably don't even really exist. There's somebody's imagination that they exist, and so they remote view them. And of course, you're going to come up with the answer that says that, it's the thing called telepathic overlay. I don't even know how long we've been talking.
We probably do another 10 minutes or so.
That's wishful thinking, Hakeem. No. So there's a thing in remote viewing called telepathic overlay, which means that you can pick up the thoughts or the mental contents of someone else that then bleeds into your results and gives you a false positive on a target. The example I like to use is, let's say your tasker, that's the person who gives you the assignment. Usually it's done through a third party so that you don't get any information. You're blind to the target. Anyway, your tasker really believes that a certain UFO event occurred, when in reality it never occurred, that somebody lied about it, or it's a hoax or something. And that person, now your tasker, believes it really happened. So they task you on this event. You don't know what it is. You have to be blind to the target. And you start remote viewing. Your subconscious goes to the intended target and says, there's nothing here. This is the empty set. I'm remote viewing the empty set, right? There's nothing here. Oh, but over here, there's this really strong signal that's related to that. And this must be what it is. And it goes over there and it brings that information in. And it happens to be they picked that from the mind of the tasker who believed the thing was real, even though it wasn't. So telepathically, they got false information from the tasker. Of course, they report it like any other kind of remote viewing, and the tasker is absolutely convinced that they've confirmed what he or she believed about this event that didn't happen. Okay, that's telepathic overlay, and it's something you got to be really careful with in remote viewing. And so I am very nervous about people who spend so much of their interest and time remote viewing anomaly targets for which it's hard to get any kind of ground truth on. And I think it's a disservice to the remote viewing field to spend your whole time doing that instead of working on improving your skills, which you have to have feedback for. You have to know you have to be able to know what the target is when you're done in order to find out what you did right or what you did wrong. So a lot of people, all they ever do is remote view anomalies. It's impossible to improve your remote viewing skills, remote viewing something you can't get real feedback on. If you get false feedback on it, doesn't help you, right? So anyway, sorry, that's a soapbox. Can you tell I was on that soapbox?
No, that was good. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think also, a lot of the military original remote viewers like yourself, you get a bad rap. Some people feel like you don't want to see change. What do you say to that? Like, they're like, oh, you could only do it this way. And people feel like that's the only way. But I heard you just say that, no, you think there could be room for advancement. It's just that there's a way to go about that, and you don't believe that it's happening.
Yeah. People don't like you to rain on their parade. And they've got their thing that they're getting a lot of entertainment from. Don't tell me I'm doing it wrong. That's basically what's happening, right? Even if they are doing it wrong. Okay. Now, we know what works. The controlled remote viewing methodology that Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff developed back in the early 80s, we know that works. Okay. People come along and say, oh, I've got this mapping thing, or I've got this other kind of remote viewing thing that is better than sliced bread, and it's way better than that old CRV stuff that you do. Well, first off, they never learned CRV, so they have nothing to compare it to, right? They invented this based on what they already knew.
Right.
And second of all, they've never demonstrated that. There's a third here too, by the way. We've never demonstrated, I take that back, it's kind of rolled in, that it is better than CRV. They've shown no evidence that it's better. And people jump on the bandwagon without knowing really what they're talking about. Controlled remote viewing has actually been very well vetted. You can imagine the government's contracting for this methodology. They have a methodology that can be transferred to non-psychically talented military personnel, and so they want to know it works. And there was a test project. They did 200 sessions, 100 sessions with someone who didn't know CRV, and then 100 sessions after the person was trained in CRV. And they measure the results in terms of correct data bits versus incorrect data bits about those targets. And they used targets that they had strong parameters for, so they knew what kind of data should be gotten. And the difference was dramatic in how much better they did with a CRV than they did without it. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean CRV is the best out there, but until someone can show me that they've got a system that actually works better, I'm not gonna say there is anything better yet. I would love to see real progress made, but I'm going to protect the system that works until somebody comes up with a system that works better, and they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that research, because I've heard a rumor out there that where people said, "Oh, CRV was never researched," or there was never.
I made the names. That was Joe McMoneagle that said that.
I know. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying anyone.
I'm happy to say names.
Actually, the person I heard that from was not Joe McMoneagle. But,
okay. All right. It might have been Ed May then. At any rate, people who say that are wrong. It was indeed vetted scientifically before it was accepted as a full-blown methodology. So.
Okay. Well, I think we hit so much. We need to do a second one of these, because you're also teaching dowsing at the Psi Games, and so we really need to dive into that. And I think that could be a whole class on its own. Where we go through this process of understanding what dowsing is, how it's done. And you used to be the president of the American Dowsing Association.
Only the local chapter in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm not that much of a glory hog, but.
So yeah, you did that, and so we definitely want to get your opinion on there. But Tyler, what do you have? Do you have anything else for Paul?
No, Paul, appreciate your time today, man. Very great discussion. I'm looking forward to sharing it with everybody, and looking forward to seeing you at the Psi Games. Very exciting.
I do have one more question, actually.
Of course you do.
I do. It's about you and I've had this conversation, and then I reached out to you the other day, and then I redid the research and I found it. But about the difference between a laboratory environment and like what we're doing at the Psi Games, adding this fun element, where community-based element too, and how that could actually aid in having better results. Versus going to like a really stringent laboratory and trying these same things out. What do you have to say about that?
Well, there's more research to be done on that, but there is a current thought that making an environment where you're trying to do ASP more fun, more accepting, can give you more success. And there is some scientific basis for that. and I hope I'm getting my facts right. If I knew you were going to ask this question, I'd have researched it to make sure I got the facts right. But there was a research project done by Richard Wiseman and Marilyn Schlitz years ago, in which they did a joint experiment. Richard's a skeptic, but he's a scientist. Marilyn is not a skeptic. She's a scientist. And they agreed to follow the exact same protocol, exact same approach in terms of how they set it up and how they worked their subjects. And they got roughly equal number of students. It was the university level. And oftentimes the undergraduates are the victims in the psychology testing, right? The psychology experiments. They got an equal number of students who worked exclusively with each of the researchers. So Marilyn, who was a very positive person, was very encouraging. She assured them they could do it. Still, all the blinding protocols were in place. All of the rigor that you need in a good science experiment were present in both cases. Marilyn, the only difference was that Marilyn was very warm, accepting, encouraging, that kind of thing. And Richard was the kind of, go ahead and do it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really care about this. He didn't say it that way, but that's kind of the attitude he's portraying, that he wasn't really invested in anything in this process, right? And when it was over, Richard's students, his subjects, and I don't remember exactly the outcome, but I don't remember if he didn't show any statistical significance at all, or just a very slight one. I can't remember what that was. And this paper's available out there on the internet. And Marilyn's were highly statistically significant. She had a great deal of success. And as far as they could tease out, both of them working together to try and figure it out, as far as they could tease out, the only difference was the attitude and the ambiance that the researcher, him or herself, cultivated. And so that suggests that it really does matter what the atmosphere, what the environment is when you do psi research. Now, I think there's danger in getting too happy-go-lucky and too, carnival-esque, more like a carnival or whatever, because then you add a level of distractions in that could increase the mental noise, right? And so you want an encouraging atmosphere, but you don't want it too noisy in terms of everybody having a good time. At least that's how I think it would work out.
But wasn't it Ingo Swann or was it Bill Ray who said that you should be able to remote view in a foxhole?
And probably both of them, and probably half a dozen of the rest of us too. I don't know who originally said the term. It might have been, I think Joe McMoneagle said it, but he might have heard it from somebody else. I mean, some of these sayings you hear in remote viewing, nobody knows who started. Like, I give a presentation I call Martial Art for the Mind, remote viewing martial art for the mind. I didn't originate that term, but I don't know who did. So I know Joe McMoneagle says he did, and maybe he did. I don't know. I think Lynn Buchanan has said he originated it, and that seems what I'm remembering. It could be wrong, but I know that other people have claimed it, and I don't know who made it up. And I don't think they do really anymore either. So yeah, certainly you can remote view from. You have to be able to remote view from a foxhole. Apparently, there are people who do. I mean, this has to do with the point man syndrome, which I think you're familiar with, probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where there are some people, when they go out on patrol, everybody wants them to walk point, because that's the most dangerous place. Isn't because they want that person to be hurt. It's because that person has a reputation of getting everybody home safe from that patrol, because they somehow have a knack for recognizing booby traps. And when there's an ambush maybe set up ahead, they have this kind of again, sixth sense warning, that there's a problem. And so these guys, they're the ones that everybody wants to go out with, because you have a better chance of coming home alive, because they have this additional ability that other people don't. And so that's a form of remote viewing in a foxhole, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's close out with this. Why are you involved in the Psi Games? And what's the biggest thing you want to see come out of this?
I'm involved in the Psi Games because Hakeem Isler twisted my arm. No. I mean, obviously you did encourage me to be involved, right? You told me about encourage me involved. But I do see a lot of promise for this. I'm excited about being there. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not sure Charlottesville is all that easy for me to get to from Utah, but I've done it before. I can do it again. It'll be a lot closer to people on the East Coast. So I think it's going to be great. My only resistance is that I have a major conference in Germany 2 weeks before, so this is going to be a little challenging to get from there to Virginia for this. But I'll pull it off. I'm anxious to see how well we identify people who have developed their abilities to the extent. So there's two things. Find people who've developed their abilities and help people develop their abilities. They're not the same thing, but they end up with the same result, is high-functioning psi-related folks, right?
Yeah. And what would that do would you like to see that because you feel it would better the community, or would you like to see that just because? Like why is that appealing to you?
Nice try, Hakeem. I think that's pretty darn obvious. Why in a field that I'm absolutely committed and dedicated to and have been since 1983, literally nonstop since 1983, why wouldn't I want to see more people getting into it and having success with it? I mean, to me, it could potentially be, to use a word that people tend to overuse, paradigm changing. We keep hoping the paradigm will change, and it doesn't, for reasons we could have a whole nother entire hour-long discussion on. But it potentially, certainly, to me, what this whole thing does, the main reason remote viewing is important to me is not just that you can do stuff with it, but that, in fact, what it tells us about human nature. Where modern day science, it's physicalist in nature, which means to modern day science, everything is physical or a function of physical fact. There's nothing non-physical about the universe. And yet, here's a remote viewer is able to, without leaving this room, perceive and experience things on the other side of the planet where they're not even witting to what they're supposed to do, and yet they succeed at that. That tells me that we are not limited by the inside of our skulls, that our minds actually are transcendent. They actually are outside of the limitations of the physical world. And what that says about humans, I think, is one of the most important facts. People have been talking about it for millennia, but this is actually hard evidence that it's true. Don't ask me any more questions. I want to end on that note.
No, that is a good end, Paul. And I'm always impressed with you. Again, I'm a nag as a student, and a matter of fact, I call you up just to see how you're doing. So I would hope that I'm a little bit more than a student. But
I have to say that I recognize the need for people to do that. Because I have so many balls in the air and I'm so easily distracted. I'm like those dogs on the movie Up. Squirrel? Yeah, right. I'm like that. And so I do need some persistence in order to make sure I do get stuff done that needs to be gotten done. So I give people permission to nag me up to a point.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you as part of the Psi Games and to spend this time with us. And, you are an amazing human being, and you're doing really great things in the world. And I believe in your mission to help people explore these aspects of themselves that, that can be scary or make you feel like it's impossible, or the world kind of tells us is impossible in some ways. And so I commend you on that. And thank you for spending this time with us tonight on Psi Talks. And Tyler, thank you. You did great today. We're killing it for our first interview of Psi Talks. And let's make the Psi Games something paradigm changing, just like you said, Paul.
Let's make the Psi Games great again.
That's it. There it is. Thanks, Paul. See you guys. Have a great one.
You betcha. You too.
Let your mind ignite, where the limits dissolve in the glow of our universal core.